would go where in a combined 11 of the 2022-23 Brighton side and the current Brighton strongest 11? Welcome back to Seagull Central. My name is Adam MacDonald and welcome back to this video where today I'm going to do something a little bit different. I'm going to go for more of a feature style video, and I want to dig in to how Brighton have evolved. The way Brighton's side looks different 2-3 years on from that amazing European clinching side under Roberto De Zerbi, maybe still regarded as our best 11, our best squad in the club's history, and comparing it to now a side which is evolving, a side which is new, a side which has had a lot of money put into it, but maybe by everyone's agreement we'd say probably isn't quite at that level just yet. However, after having gone through player by player, I think you might find that there's a few surprises along the way, and I think that maybe opens up a couple of conversations around the quality of our squad. What I'm going to do is I'm going to take a player from each position in the 2022-23 Brighton side and the current 25-26 Brighton side and see who I'd pick and see really how many players from each squad would make it on either side of the debate and who would you put in where. I'd love to know your thoughts. This is something where I imagine you're going to probably disagree with me quite a lot. I might disagree with you. You might disagree with other people in the comments below. Get down there. Let me know whether you think I'm talking rubbish or not, or what you would do differently, and also just how you think Brighton have developed over the last few years, because I think lots of changes, lots of new players. There's only a couple of players who actually carry over from both sides on this. I think things are quite interesting. Let's get straight into it. What I'm doing is I'll go through the two 11s that I'm talking about, and then we'll take it from there. So the 2022-2023 season 11, I'm going with this. I'm going Jason Steele in goal. I know he obviously rotated with Bart Verbrugge, but it really was Jason Steele's season in terms of breaking out and being so brilliant. Joel Veltman, Mr. Reliable at right back, Dunk at right centre-back, Levi Colwill at left centre-back, Pervis Estupiñán at left back. We had Moises Caicedo at central defensive midfield, alongside Alexis Mac Allister in central midfield. Pascal Gross also playing in midfield as well. Mitoma on the left. Solly March, who was electric on the right. And then Evan Ferguson up front. Evan Ferguson obviously also supported by Danny Welbeck in that season. But I think considering we're seeing Welbeck in this team as well, we'll compare him against the Ferguson of that first breakout side. And then comparing to this side, I've gone for Bart Verbrugge in goal. It is his number one position now, isn't it? Joel Veltman at right back. Lewis Dunk at centre-half alongside Jan-Paul van Hecke. At left-back, Maxim de Kuiper. In central midfield, Baleba and Yassin Ayari. On the right, Yankuba Minteh. On the left, Mitoma still. In the number 10, Jorginho Rutter. And up front, the banging goal sensation that is Danny Welbeck. So let's get into it. How would you do things? Let's see what you think. Steele or Verbrugge? It's interesting this because you got to remember back in that 2022-23 season, Steele was the man. Steele was the guy. Like, I think even now when you sometimes see Jason Steele play 2-3 years on, we saw him obviously in the FA, in the Carabao Cup away at Arsenal. He still is really, really good with the ball at his feet. I might even argue that actually in terms of the ball at his feet, he is still better than Bart Verbrugge. Bart Verbrugge, a player who's probably still finding his feet, kind of 2 years in, three. Yes, this is his third season at the club. Second is being the number one first choice goalkeeper. I think Bart Verbrugge is an excellent shot stopper, but I think what we saw in that 2022-2023 season from Jason Steele was unbelievable. And I think it's important that we don't kind of brush over that too much. However, with that said, I think on this one, I am going to go with Bart Verbrugge. And I think what we're seeing this season is a player really coming to his own. I think overall, in terms of the full package, I think I would rather have had Bart Verbrugge in goal back then. I think I would probably pick him in a combined 11 now. I think, yes, he's a little bit ropey. I don't always trust him with his feet. Yes, sometimes, his penalty record hasn't been brilliant up until that penalty save against Brentford. But actually, in terms of quality of player overall, I think he is better than Jason Steele. I will not hear any Jason Steele slander. I think he's a top keeper. He was excellent for us in that season and maybe deserved to crack it going forward if we didn't have such a young keeper breathing down his neck. But on this occasion, I'm going to go with Bart Verbrugge. Okay, let's go to right back. Joel Veltman versus Matt Weaver. I forgot Weaver's surname there. Jeez Louise. God, the millennial pause I just went into there. I think it's pretty obvious on this one. Look, I think Joel Veltman in that season was absolutely unbelievable. Probably his best season at the club. I think in terms of looking at him now, I think there's a case that he still deserves to start even now over Matt Weaver. I think we're seeing Matt Weaver, a player who is excellent, when stepping into midfield, joining attacks, providing really, really useful opportunities for the Albion. But actually, in terms of a right back, one of the most dribbled past defenders in the Premier League so far this season. We've seen it multiple times where he's kind of been done in 1v1 situations in terms of defending against the goal. And I do think you compare it to Joel Veltman, probably in the last 5-6 years since he came to the club, one of my favourite players, if not my favourite players, Mr. Consistent. In terms of the current players we've got, I just absolutely love Joel Veltman. I think in that season, it was one of his best seasons. He was a crucial part of that defence, and maybe at that point hadn't been fully appreciated by the Brighton supporters, should I say. And I think in terms of what he's done in the last 5 years, you're always picking Joel Veltman in that side. So far, it's 1-1 for both sides. Now we'll go to the centre half. It's Lewis Dunk versus Lewis Dunk for this one, but which version would you pick? Would you pick Lewis Dunk from the 2022-23 season, which was maybe one of his best seasons in a Brighton shirt? Or would you pick him now, the more experienced, the more ready, the more proven, the more calm, the more collected, the better nous defender? What would you do? Or would you go back to that season where he was brilliant? For me, I think you got to go back to that season. I think, let's put it into context. This season, despite the fact I'd spoken before about maybe being a little bit concerned around his performances this season on Brighton too poor a defensive side, is Lewis Dunk past it? Now at 500 games, we're seeing his last 2, 3, 4, 5 games for Brighton. He's been very, very good. You think to the Brentford game, you think to the Leeds at home game, you think to the Palace game. Multiple games where he's looked really, really good for the Albion. Even, in the Villa game, the defeat, he looks very good. And, we're seeing the best of Lewis Dunk. We're seeing a calm performance. We're seeing assured performances from him week in, week out. But I think if you take it back to that 2022-2023 season, I think, he was one of the best defenders in England at that time. Obviously, was part of that squad with England, was probably in the form of his career. I think you've got to take the Lewis Dunk of probably 2 years ago. I think that's fair enough to say. Right, let's move on. I think this is a really interesting one. Levi Colwill versus Jan-Paul van Hecke. What would you do here? Now, let's not forget, Levi Colwill was absolutely unbelievable in that season for Brighton. Jan-Paul van Hecke on the bench at that time, coming in and out, didn't really get his proper opportunity at Brighton to start until Levi Colwill left in that following season. But Van Hecke came in and out. Would you compare the Van Hecke of now to the Levi Colwill of then? How would you do it? Well, Levi Colwill was classy. He was a beautiful player. He was elegant, and only 19 years old, 20 years old, showed real quality and strength and maturity and a vision to the way he played. And I think when we went in to try and sign him for, kind of 40 million quid that summer, it felt like a lot of dough, but actually that would have been an absolute bargain for a player who will probably go on to be one of England's best centre-halves in the next 5-10 years. An unbelievable player for Brighton, will be forever kind of immortal in the sense that he was part of that amazing Brighton 11. What would you do? I think I probably would pick Jan-Paul van Hecke now, though. I think what we're seeing in Jan-Paul van Hecke is a player who's got that fight, got that dog in him, got that leadership. He's got that Dunk mentality of the last-ditch defending. He's a goal scorer. He's talismanic. He pops up when you need him. He's a brilliant sprayer of the ball. I think he's got a bit of everything, and he probably is, I think right now, you've got to even say right now, he's probably better than Levi Colwill. I don't know. In terms of what Levi Colwill did in that season, it was brilliant, but I think the player we've got now in this Hürzeler side is absolutely fantastic. So I'm going to go Jan-Paul van Hecke. Right, left back, where do we go with that? Pervis Estupiñán versus Maxim de Kuiper. I think for me, it's a pretty straightforward one. Pervis Estupiñán in that season, alongside Karim Mitoma, absolutely unbelievable. One of the best left backs in the league, one of the best left backs out there. Brighton were absolutely fantastic with Pervis Estupiñán at right back. Yes, Maxim de Kuiper might go on to be a brilliant player for Brighton. He's an attacking fullback. He scores goals. You think back to that game against Forest away at the City Ground, where he was just absolutely monstrous, electric, play with zip, panache. It looked really, really good in attacking sense. I don't think you can overlook Estupiñán. In terms of creating a best ever Brighton 11, he goes in at left back, no doubt about it. Part of one of our best ever teams, and that connection with Mitoma on the left wing, absolutely unbelievable. So for me, it's got to be Estupiñán. And I think if we go to the left wing, do you compare Mitoma from the 2022 season to this season now? Which one are you picking? You're obviously picking the Mitoma of the 22-23 season. I think for me, that was just an amazing season. You've got to remember, he started that season barely playing. It was Graham Potter who'd started the season with him, didn't really play him. We saw him in the odd game come off the bench. De Zerbi came in, loved him straight away. He's a player who takes on his man, who gets at players, who gets the attacks moving, gets us up the field, scores goals, creates opportunities, and linked up so well with Estupiñán. Those two on the left-hand side were unbelievable. Probably our best ever combination on a wing and fullback that we've ever seen at the club, and we maybe will ever see. Who knows? Let's touch wood that it's not, but it might be. Unbelievable players. Mitoma, that really was his breakout season. I think you've got to say last season he had a very good season. Some of the goals he scored. This season he struggled with injury. Obviously the European season maybe not as good as well. But in that season when we achieved Europe, he was absolutely monstrous. Brilliant. So I think those two on the left-hand side have got to be picked. Right, let's go into central midfield. Caicedo or Carlos Baleba? What do you do here? Look, I love Carlos Baleba. I think Carlos Baleba, maybe at the moment is struggling, and there's a lot of talk around transfer, talk and all of these things. I know that there's some personal reasons going on in his life at the minute. That's also contributing to kind of why he's not performing as well. But we saw it last season. We saw the quality that Carlos Baleba played at, the intensity that he played at, the ability to just dominate a match, change, the momentum for Brighton, win midfield battles. If we were playing with the Carlos Baleba of last season, I think he'd get in there over Moises Caicedo. I'll be honest with you, when I speak to other people about Carlos Baleba, I always say he's a little bit of Caicedo, he's a little bit of Basuma. I think he's better than both of them. I think he's the best we've had in that central position. However, I think this season, if we're talking about the 24-25 season for Brighton, he's not been great. And I think if you're comparing that side to the 22-23 season under De Zerbi with Caicedo in that midfield, Caicedo was brilliant. Part of those brilliant plays we used to do, the kind of pre-made plays where we'd bring the ball out from the back, press bait. He was absolutely brilliant. I'm going to go with Moises Caicedo. Yassin Ayari, that's our next one. Yassin Ayari or Alexis Mac Allister. What would you do here? Really tough one, because I love both of these players, and I think the trouble with Alexis Mac Allister is we probably didn't see enough of him, and what he was able to do in that central midfield position for Brighton was absolutely brilliant. And I think it's unfair on Ayari because they're slightly different types of players, and Ayari is clearly growing into his position. I think this season, next season for Brighton, the end of next season will probably be when some big clubs come knocking, because so far he's probably been one of our best players this season. But I think you've got to give it to Alexis Mac Allister in terms of what we saw, in terms of, again, that elite mindset, that talismanic moment. You think about that penalty he scored down in front of the North Stand against Man United to secure European football in May 2023. That was unbelievable moment. Deserved his move. One of our best midfielders. I think if you're making our best midfield, you put him, in the midfield alongside probably a Moises Caicedo, and I think he deserves it. The next player you'd probably put in that midfield is a Pascal Gross as well, and let's get on to that one. Pascal Gross or Jorginho Rutter. Again, it's tough because I love Jorginho, one of my favourite players at the club right now. I think he's prodigiously talented, the way he can run at players, take players on. I think there's few players in our squad like that, and he is an unbelievable player. The trouble is I think he's obviously coming up against someone like Pascal Gross, who you can maybe say is our best ever player. And in that number 10 position, probably the best player we've seen at number 10, in a Brighton shirt. Yes, people still harp on about people like Vicente. There's different levels to this. Pascal Gross, an unbelievable player, makes the best 11, has to make the best 11 of all time, has to get in over Jorginho Rutter. I think those two in a side together would be brilliant, but I think on this occasion you've got to give it to Pascal Gross. So it looks like the 22-23 season team is kind of, building up a bit of steam. We've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 so far that have got in over the 24-25 season. But, we still do have Bruggen in there. We've got Van Hecker in there as well. And I'm going to give a couple more. And one of them I will give is the right wing debate. And I do think Minteh on March, you might disagree with me on this one. So I'd love to know your thoughts on this. I'm going to give this to Yankuba Minteh. Yes, I know, in the 22-23 season, that was probably Solly March's best season. And we haven't seen the best of him since then. Obviously, he struggled after getting that injury, in the following season against Man City. We've barely really seen him since. And that was his breakout season. De Zerbi was able to literally, on his own, using his own coaching, transform him from a jobbing left wing back to an electric right winger who scores goals. And that was always my criticism of Solly March, that he didn't score enough goals. And then he finally became a goal scorer, a lethal goal scorer for the Albion. And I think De Zerbi and him deserve a lot of credit for that. An unbelievable player, an absolutely unbelievable player in that season. However, I just love Yankuba Minteh. I love what he does. I love his directness. I think, yes, he's raw. Yes, he's lacking in clinicalness sometimes. Yes, he's a bit frustrating. But God, does he work hard. And I think if he was in that side, my God, I'd love to see the way he'd have played in that team with the pressing and the brutal counter-attacks we'd go on. I think he would have been an absolutely unbelievable player. For me, I'm going to put him in over Solly March in the 22-23 season. You might disagree with me, but let me know. Is that controversial? I feel like it might be. And then finally, Danny Welbeck or Evan Ferguson. Now, Evan Ferguson, you got to remember in that 22-23 season, that was his breakout season, wasn't it? You think about the goal he scored in the 3-0 win against Newcastle, the hat-trick he scored in the 3-0 win against Newcastle. The multiple games he scored where he scored brilliant goals. There was a goal at home against Southampton he scored. There are plenty of goals where he was absolutely brilliant for Brighton, and that was his season, and really he wasn't able to replicate it since then. However, would you have him or would you have the current Danny Welbeck, who's banging in goals, has had a brilliant start to the season and looks the best he ever has? It's really tough when I would probably flip a coin. You think because of age and the profile, you'd pick Evan Ferguson if he could repeat that season over and over and over and over and over again. Maybe you pick him. I don't know. I'm doubting myself now because I, in my head, had picked Danny Welbeck. You know, I think what Danny Welbeck's doing this season has been brilliant. He looks like a beast. But maybe you do pick Evan Ferguson. Oh, God, what am I going to do? Because I know Evan Ferguson now isn't at that level, but God, remember how good he was in that season. I'm going to give it to Danny Welbeck still. I'm going to stick to my guns. However, I think, God, this is really tight. Because I know Danny Welbeck was obviously still part of that side and was a big part of that side too. And Evan Ferguson wasn't necessarily the striker, but some of the goals he scored, the way he was playing with confidence. Yes, to be fair, actually, you know, he was probably still emerging a little bit. Maybe he wasn't quite as good as I'm remembering. But scored some great goals and looked like a really, really top talent and top prospect, I suppose. Whereas right now we're seeing someone in Danny Welbeck who is the real deal. Hold-up play, pressing machine, goal scorer, Mr. Reliable, strong, can lead the line, playing some of the best football he's played in his whole career. I think he probably does deserve it. So yeah, that's the 11. Let's go through it. So Bart Verbruggen in goal. I'd give Joel Veltman at right back. Lewis Dunk of the 22-23 season would be at centre half alongside Jan-Paul van Hecke of this current season. Pervis Estupiñán of the 22-23 season. In the midfield, it's a three-man midfield, all from the 22-23 season of Caicedo, Mac Allister and Gross. That's in ahead of Baleba, Ayari and Rutter of the now. I think we've all got to agree with that. Mitoma of the 22-23 season gets in over the Mitoma of this season. And this 11. On the right wing, though, I will give it to Yankuba Minteh of this current 25-26 season over March from the 22-23 season. I think he just gets in for me. And I'll also give Danny Welbeck of this current season in ahead of Evan Ferguson, that breakout 22-23 season when we clinched Europe. Look, two very, very good sides. And, you know, considering the fact that we all consider that 22-23 side maybe our best ever side, the side that got us Europe as our best ever squad, got to think about the fact we had Enciso on the bench, Van Hecke on the bench, Buonanotte on the bench. There were so many options that we had in that side. Billy Gilmore on the bench, you know, various options that we had. You know, we had some really good options. But I think we've done, you know, this side, you know, despite the fact it's maybe not fully formed yet and reached its potential, I think, you know, to get kind of 4 players in that side to get into the combined 11, I think is a good going from the 2024 side. And the 2025-26 hasn't probably says that it's maybe a little bit better than we all think. I'd love to know your thoughts. How many of those do you agree with? How many of those do you disagree with? Do you think I've been a little bit too reminiscent? You know, my nostalgic goggles have been on too strongly around the previous side. Do you think any more players from this side would get in? I would love to know your thoughts. As always, if you've enjoyed this video and you've got this far, please hit the subscribe button, turn your notifications on. I would love to know your thoughts and I would love to have you coming back to this channel. Thank you very much for watching. I will see you on the next video. And as always, up the Albion.